J.J. Abrams is now the only director other than George Lucas himself to have directed more than one Star Wars film. Abrams' first entry in the franchise, The Force Awakens, was criticized for being a stealth remake of the original Star Wars. A fair point, though I enjoyed that film quite a bit. And if Abrams has committed the same offense with The Rise of Skywalker, and he has, at least this time, he's a little more candid about it. A crucial scene in Rise of Skywalker features one of our heroes literally climbing through the wreckage of a pivotal setting from an earlier film. It's hard to get more on the nose than that, short of one character turning to another and saying, "This is a lot like Return of the Jedi, you know?" The Rise of Skywalker is a lot like Return of the Jedi, but sitting in the theater, I realized something peculiar about its relationship to that earlier film. I recently rewatched Return of the Jedi so that Jason and I could review it on our podcast, Late Seating, and I decided that it worked much better when taken as an episode of a series than as a standalone film. Rise of Skywalker, on the other hand, despite how closely tied its story is to earlier episodes of both this recent sequel trilogy and the 3 original Star Wars films, works much better when judged apart from the saga it is intended to conclude. I say that for a few reasons, some more personal than others. The biggest reason is that Rise of Skywalker either ignores or, in some cases, out-and-out retcons previous episodes in the series. Characters who seemed to have been killed off rather definitively are back, their returns hand-waved with a line or two of dialogue. Direct, unambiguous, and thematically significant statements about the backgrounds of certain characters are written over. Turns out they were only true from a certain point of view, I guess. Ongoing character arcs are either ignored or resolved in the most obvious way possible. Actually, pretty much everything Rise of Skywalker resolves is resolved in the most obvious way possible. That's as close to a spoiler as I'm going to get in this review, but really, it's the only piece of information you need to spoil the entire movie, broadly speaking at least. Even the significance of the film's title, the subject of much spirited speculation since it was announced back in April, is easy to guess before seeing the film if you just try to imagine the least imaginative meaning it could have. On a more personal level, the decision to plot a course along the path of least resistance for this final film of the Skywalker saga is annoying because it disregards some of the most challenging and satisfying parts of its immediate predecessor, The Last Jedi, which I found to be far and away the best film in the entire franchise, other than The Empire Strikes Back. Some critics have characterized Rise of Skywalker as a rebuke of Last Jedi, or even an apology to those in the fanbase who were unhappy with it. I wouldn't go that far. It picks up on several of the threads left dangling at the end of the last film and carries forward some of its more important themes, particularly the struggling rebellion/resistance clinging to its ever-diminishing hope of survival as it faces a seemingly insurmountable enemy force. But then again, isn't that every Star Wars movie? The Rise of Skywalker's most disappointing departure from The Last Jedi is in its re-narrowing of the scope of what Star Wars is. Last Jedi's dominant theme was one of inclusivity. The Force belonged to everyone. And that film ended with the stirring, and for this franchise anyway, provocative suggestion that the salvation of the Resistance would come not from someone related to the saga's central dynasty, but from ordinary people who carry the spirit of the rebellion with them in their everyday lives, and, given the opportunity, are just as capable of being heroes as those people on the Millennium Falcon. Well, never mind about all that. Sure, some things are stronger than blood, as someone says at some point, but in this context, that just means if you were born into one powerful family, you can choose to side with another powerful family if you want. And the peasants, sure, they can help in the fight, but it's what the people with the important parents and grandparents do that really matters. Of course, I can't be too hard on The Rise of Skywalker because it's only doing what every other Star Wars film aside from The Last Jedi has done. Remember, Luke Skywalker was just a farm boy who ran off to join the rebellion until it turned out he carried the blood of the Chosen One. It would be nice if J.J. Abrams and the others who made Rise of Skywalker had found a way of concluding this series other than having it repeat itself. But when I think about it, that's just me wishing for Star Wars to be something it's not. Because the truth is, as much as I love it, well, most of it, Star Wars has been repeating itself for decades. Let's not forget the plot of Return of the Jedi was basically, we have to blow up the Death Star again. Even my beloved Last Jedi recycles quite a few beats from earlier films, particularly Empire Strikes Back, though I would argue it at least lends them a more creative twist than Rise of Skywalker gives to its refurbished components. But enough about the bad stuff, because believe it or not, even though I've been pretty hard on it so far, I actually wound up liking The Rise of Skywalker. Yes, the way it tosses some of the more interesting developments of its predecessor out the window disappointed me. Yes, it annoys me how it wraps things up in a very obvious and predictable way. And yes, it's about half an hour too long. The villain and major threat feel conjured from out of thin air, and the obstacles our heroes face seem designed more to extend the running time and provide opportunities for crowd-pleasing callbacks and cameos than to tell the story and develop the characters in the best way possible. But despite all of that, I've got to tell you, by the end, this movie had me. I might not have liked the direction certain characters went, but I cared about what happened to them. I was emotionally invested. I even choked up a couple of times, and I'm all man. Here's the thing. J.J. Abrams has his detractors, but I'm not one of them. I think the lens flares are pretty. He's not my favorite director. He's not the most artistically ambitious filmmaker. He's far more interested in teasing and pleasing his audience than in challenging them, but he is as good at what he does as anybody who is doing it at the moment. He's a fantastic action director. Rise of Skywalker has some really terrific action scenes. He might not be all that ambitious when it comes to story and character, but he knows where to put his camera, where and when to move it, when to push in close, and when to pull back and let the emotion of a scene come to us. Abrams is also a good director of actors, and that serves this film particularly well. Rise of Skywalker benefits tremendously from its performances. Perhaps more than any other Star Wars film to date, this one leans on the charisma and likability of its central trio, and Daisy Ridley, John Boyega, and Oscar Isaac carry the load and make it look easy. Of the three, Rey is the only one to have much of an arc in this one. Finn and Poe are mostly just along for the ride, but everybody gets moments to shine. And most importantly, the friendship shared by the three of them continues to feel genuine and important. It's the heart of this film and of this entire sequel trilogy. Other than Rey, the only major character allowed to significantly develop this time around is Kylo Ren. His character arc is as predictable as the rest of the film, which is too bad, but Adam Driver brings him to life and makes him a tortured, tragic villain who is compelling in spite of how unimaginatively he's used in this story. Of all the stars of the sequel trilogy, Driver might just be the MVP. Thanks to him, Kylo Ren emerges as the most interesting villain of the entire Star Wars franchise. He's not as iconic as Vader, not as cartoonishly entertaining as the Emperor, but he has more depth and complexity than both of them put together. Rise of Skywalker is packed with appearances from fan-favorite characters from previous films. Some of these are basically cameos. Some are more substantial supporting roles. One is a cameo that should have been a substantial supporting role. I love you, Rose. You were my favorite character in the last one. We'll always have Canto Bite. Lando was in the trailer, so I'm not spoiling anything by telling you he's in it. It's good to see him again, and he has a nice moment where he reminds the new kids that his generation won their war by sticking together. There are other appearances by veterans of the original trilogy, some you would expect, some that might be a surprise, some that you might miss if you blink at the wrong time. The OT veteran whose appearance was the subject of the most speculation was, of course, Carrie Fisher, who died in 2016. Her presence in this film comes in the form of unused footage originally shot for The Force Awakens. Her role is limited, as one would expect, but still important, and her integration into this story is about as seamless as something like this could be. Kudos to J.J. Abrams and his creative team for pulling it off and not allowing it to come across as creepy and uncanny, like, say, CGI Leia at the end of Rogue One. In fact, kudos to J.J. Abrams and his creative team for pulling this whole thing off. Do I wish they'd been more adventurous when crafting this story? Yes. Do I wish they had ambitions beyond fan service, homage to previous films in the franchise, and resolving the story in the safest way possible? Yes, I really do. But what they did well. And for as much as I lament what might have been, I will always appreciate a big, crowd-pleasing blockbuster with a climax that features ordinary people rising up to do battle against a tyrannical fascist regime. That's an example that we should all take to heart and be willing to follow, especially at this moment in history, and most especially with an election coming up here in the United States next year. There are more of us than there are of them. It's a good Star Wars. It's not a great Star Wars. It's not the thrilling and inventive deconstruction/reconstruction that The Last Jedi was, but it's not a bad Star Wars either. It's a well-made, well-acted, entertaining popcorn movie, and as an ending to its trilogy and the trilogy of trilogies that forms the spine of the Star Wars franchise, it'll do. If you liked it more than I did, great. I'm happy for you. If you didn't like it as much as I did, that's fine too, because whichever Star Wars movies you did like are still there. And you can watch them whenever you want, because Star Wars, like the Force, belongs to everyone. And it will be with us. Always. Hey folks, I know I typically save these little post-show segments for the end of the Trek Actually videos, and I don't really do them for movie reviews, but I just wanted to add real quick, since I mentioned my movie review podcast during the review, and I am not someone who is above a cheap plug when the opportunity presents itself. Yes, I do co-host a movie review podcast called Late Seating, along with the brilliant, funny, hilarious, awesome, just generally great Jason Harding, and we have now reviewed all 6 of the original Star Wars trilogy and the prequel trilogy for our podcast. The most recent episode of our show was our review of Return of the Jedi, and that completes our reviews of the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy. I will have links to our reviews of all of those classic Star Wars films in the description of this video. So if you haven't listened to those, feel free to go listen to our reviews of Star Wars, Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi, Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, and Revenge of the Sith. And we also did a special review a couple years ago, actually right when it came out, a special review of Force Awakens. I'll link to that. And later this week, we are releasing our Christmas episode. And this year, our Christmas episode is a commentary track for the Star Wars Holiday Special. So when that comes out, it probably won't be up by the time you watch this, but when that does come out, I will add a link to that to the description of this as well. And you can listen to that and listen to us make fun of the Holiday Special while you watch along with us. It'll be a lot of fun. So just wanted to plug our Star Wars content on the Late Seating podcast for those of you who watch this review and are maybe a little interested in hearing me and a much, much funnier version of me review and talk about Star Wars for many, 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 many hours. So check out the Late Seating Star Wars reviews linked in the description, and thank you all very much for watching, everybody. Take care.